Yeah.
Okay, so a very good morning to you all. I think we are ready to start our lecture today, and this is a continuation of the lectures that we've been having, more specifically on the major subject of developing a scholarly research program, but incorporating many of the things that we've not in the past probably thought that they are very important. We saw that in our first lecture, we're looking at the philosophical foundations of research programs. And we actually did integrate the various philosophical traditions to try and conceptualize research programs. And just to remind you, we had the positivistic perspective. We had the interpretivist perspective. We had also the positivistic, where we had logical positivism. Then we had also critical realist perspective. And of course, critical theory perspective as well, right? Now, we actually saw how we can craft a program, and more specifically, a research program from all those particular dimensions. So if I look at your statement of the program, I am able to tell that you are actually using, or you are going to take the critical realist philosophical orientation, or probably an interpretivist perspective, or positivistic or logical positivism as such. Now, all those were paradigms that we think are very important in helping us to craft a research program. From there, if you recall, our second lecture, if not the third, took us into research programs and the history of scientific progress. We saw various individuals who have actually shaped scholarship, and more specifically, philosophy of science. And we looked at Karl Popper and the research program. And Karl Popper, as we saw, looks at a research program as the engine of science, right? So we began with his ideas, and I did send you a book, which we covered, by the way. That was Conjectures and Refutations, right? And of course, according to Karl Popper, if you recall, all life is problem solving, meaning that scientific inquiry proceeds through the problem, conjectures, we go to testing, then refutation, and thereafter a new problem emerges. So we actually saw how we can use the ideas of Karl Popper from his works of conjectures and refutation to craft a scholarly research program. We also looked at Thomas Kuhn and the scientific revolution, and I sent you a book, right? And I hope you have had an opportunity to read that particular book, right? And of course, according to Thomas Kuhn, as we saw, again from his work, and I'm assuming that you've just read it, Thomas Kuhn believes that during periods of normal science, researchers attempt to solve puzzles within an accepted paradigm, meaning that your work will actually reside in a particular paradigm. But after some time, anomalies will eventually accumulate, right? And then when those anomalies accumulate and they become too numerous, then a scientific, just a moment, I think somebody was requesting for something here. When they do accumulate, then a scientific revolution will occur. So research problems, therefore, emerge from unresolved anomalies, meaning that you can actually craft a problem from that perspective as well. And again, if I look at your problem, I will be able to tell whether you are coming from Karl Popper's perspective, conjectures and refutation, or you are coming from Thomas Kuhn. But that also took us to the works of Imre Lactos and the research program, if you recall. And I'm just reminding you a few things that we did cover. And we saw that Imre Lactos was actually a philosopher of mathematics and science. And he argued that theories belong to a broader research program. And therefore, his thinking is that problems emerge when existing theories require excessive modifications. So meaning that the theories that you are presented with, the ones that you cherish today, and you even think, right, when you are using them in your work, and sometimes people may actually think that you are the developer of the theory, actually have anomalies, right, and meaning that they may not be able to perform under certain conditions. Maybe something I didn't tell you, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I gave you co-host rights. Help me unmute those mics that misbehave from time to time. So we're looking at Imre Lactos without losing the tempo, right? And the belief here is that those existing theories that you're using actually require excessive modifications, and when they are unable to explain phenomenon or situations or realities, so that means they actually require what we call modifications, and that's how problems actually arise or emerge in this case. So these are very, very important. And of course, the other thing that we saw from Imre Lactos is the belief that theoretical explanations, given the changes that are taking place in the environment and from community to community and many developments coming up, many of the theories actually may lose their predictive power. So theoretical explanations lose predictive power, and when they lose predictive power, then problems certainly emerge. So meaning that your research at the doctoral level, ladies and gentlemen, is supposed to contribute by strengthening or challenging existing research programs. From there, I think we ended, if you recall very well, we ended with the Lally-Loudon and the problem solving, right? And of course, according to Lally-Loudon, as we saw, good theories usually attempt to solve empirical problems, right? And these empirical problems are actually observed phenomenon requiring explanation or explanations. And sometimes the problems that you deal with could be conceptual in nature, meaning that these conceptual problems realize the fact that there are internal inconsistencies within these particular theories that we are using. And of course, this perspective, as we saw last time, is very, very useful to you as doctoral researchers, because it emphasizes solving important problems that exist within the conceptual domains and within the empirical domains, rather than thinking about accumulating data at that level, ladies and gentlemen. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we move to the third dimension, right? And let me see if I can share my slides here. Hopefully it will be quite easy for me to share, right? That is where we are. Today we are going to deal with what constitutes a scholarly research program. Let me try to put this in a slideshow so that we move very well. What constitutes a scholarly research program? That is our third element, right, that we are covering. And as we saw, actually the other day when I was sending you a message inviting you for this lecture, I did indicate a number of things that we shall be looking at, right from this module of ours or item of ours, which is item 3, what constitutes a scholarly research program, up to the end when we shall be crafting topics from practical problems, because I think many of our doctoral students actually think that you start with a topic that you take to the supervisor, he approves, and after coming up with the topic, you start forging a research problem that may not even exist out there, right? And this is very, very common with the students, especially who do not know exactly what to do, right? But once you have a problem, then it is quite easy for you to undertake research. So our topic today is what constitutes a scholarly research problem. And I think this is very important. So what we shall see, our learning objectives today is that we shall be able to define. First of all, I'll give you an overview of what this entails, and then I expect you to define scholarly research problems at the end of this lecture, and also to distinguish topics, distinguish issues, distinguish gaps, and also distinguish problems, right? And this is very, very important. And I believe that this topic actually matters for you as doctoral students, because most doctoral proposals fail because the problem is unclear, ladies and gentlemen. And I think this is very, very important. And I think I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about this so that you understand what we are talking about. And this is one of the greatest challenges that are faced by doctoral students. They cannot distinguish between a topic. They cannot distinguish between a topic and a practical concern and a managerial issue, or even a social challenge or a research gap and a genuine scholarly research problem, right? It's very important for you to know that many of the problems that you'll be dealing with at this level are actually scholarly research problems. Ladies and gentlemen, help me mute. I think that was Irian Balunji, right, with his mic that is misbehaving, right? So scholarly research problems are very important, and those are the ones that we shall be dealing with. As I said, many doctoral candidates begin their studies with a broad interest, and they have those areas that they come up with. They say, well, I want to do my research in the leadership. I want to research in the area of climate change. I want to work in the area of governance. I want to work in entrepreneurship. I want to work on energy access. I want to deal with financial inclusion, right? Artificial intelligence, healthcare. I mean, there are so many areas that actually attract the interest of students, right? However, these areas that I'm mentioning, right, are merely broad areas or domains of inquiry, right? As a doctoral student, your doctoral thesis is not built around these major domains of inquiry, but it is built around a scholarly research problem, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why many of your doctoral committee members will be asking you questions from time to time. And they'll be asking you as to whether the topic you are actually claim, right, to be working on is scholarly or not, right? Or they'll be wondering whether the problem that you are dealing with is scholarly, right, or probably it's a managerial issue that requires a solution. In other words, it attracts some bit of consultancy research rather than rigorous academic research that we undertake at the PhD level, right? So this is one of the most common weaknesses observed in doctoral proposals, right? And that's where we have a confusion and or maybe a tendency to confuse societal challenges with the scholarly problems. So these are very important. Maybe I can give you some examples where a student may correctly, for example, identify a problem, right? Or let me call it an issue, right? But which may not attract scholarly research, right? But these could be legitimate areas, and issues are really very, very okay, right? Let me just give you an example, right? A student who correctly identifies that youth unemployment is increasing, right? Youth unemployment is increasing, and we all know that this is a serious issue, right, within our economy, right? But it is not yet scholarly, right? You could also identify the fact that corruption in Uganda, for example, remains pervasive, right? But it may also be at a broader level or probably even regional level, right? Yeah, and that's an issue. Or you identify the fact that SMEs continue to fail, right? That is legitimate. Renewable energy adoption possibly is slow, right? Or maybe educational outcomes are deteriorating. All those are examples, and you have so many of them, right? So I'm just saying that these do not automatically constitute, right, scholarly research problems. So there's a lot of work that you have to do as a PhD student to try, right, and convert these into scholarly research problems. So, ladies and gentlemen, a scholarly research problem emerges only when a researcher demonstrates that existing knowledge is inadequate to explain or probably understand or predict or resolve a phenomenon of interest. So, for example, if you discover that renewable energy adoption is slow, that is very good, right? But unless, right, you convince us that existing knowledge in that area is inadequate to explain that slow adoption, or you tell us that the existing knowledge, right, is inadequate to understand or even predict or resolve that particular phenomenon, right? Unless you tell us that that is happening, then your problem is not scholarly enough, right? So that's where now you must find a way, and it's not even finding a way, incidentally. Again, coming from Karl Popper's conjectures and refutations, right? Going to lactose, right? If you remember Imre Lactose, and also going into Laudian and a few other people, unless you utilize that knowledge, right? And also look at, for example, Kuhn, right, with the structure of scientific revolution. So unless you understand those things and also understand the fact that knowledge develops and emerges within a particular paradigm, right? Whether now you're talking about positivistic or probably you're talking about logical positivism or you go into constructivism or interpretivism, unless you understand that kind of thing, then you may fail to come up with a scholarly research problem. In fact, if you come up with a very good scholarly research problem, life becomes a little bit clearer because even writing your introduction becomes very, very okay. And you won't have any problem as you transit from chapter 1 going to chapter 2, which is literature review or even theoretical reviews, right, up to your methodology section, right? So once you know how to craft a scholarly research problem, then life becomes very, very easy. So the importance of research problems in scientific inquiry, of course, has long been emphasized by philosophers of science. And that's why it is important for us to note those fellows, Karl Popper, Cook, right, Lactose, and Loudon, right, who have argued or come up with a number of arguments that we have already seen, ladies and gentlemen. So this topic that we are dealing with today, if I could take you back, what constitutes scholarly research problem, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very, very important because unless you understand what constitutes a scholarly research problem, you never have a very good research problem. So our central thesis in this discussion, our discussion today, is that a dissertation is built around a scholarly problem, but not a topic. So I'm actually discouraging you from the disease that has actually been troubling many of you, right? You find a topic somewhere from one of the textbooks, and you rush, you go to your supervisor, approve my topic, right? When you meet someone who has a topic that has been approved by supervisor because the student was a nagging student, then you say, but for me, my supervisor is not very good. My doctoral committee has a problem because they have refused to approve my topic, right? So do not be taken up by topics, and so that you love the topic so much rather than coming up with a scholarly research problem, right? The central argument here is that your entire thesis, right, will be around, so it will be built around this scholarly problem. So it's quite important for us to get that. So how do we then define, right, a scholarly research problem, ladies and gentlemen, right? So as you can see, our definition is very simple, right? We define a research problem, and here I mean a scholarly, not just a research problem, but a scholarly research problem, right, as a significant deficiency, right, or a significant inconsistency, or a significant contradiction, or a significant anomaly, right, or a significant puzzle, or significant unresolved question. You can even add many other words, or unexplained phenomenon within existing knowledge that requires systematic investigation to advance understanding, to advance theory, to advance policy, to advance practice, and advance methodology, ladies and gentlemen. I think I need to repeat this because unless we understand what we are discussing today, it will be very hard for us to come up with a very good, what I call an informed or scholarly research problem, ladies and gentlemen. So when we are talking about a research problem, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about a significant deficiency, right? We are talking about a significant inconsistency, right? We are talking about a significant contradiction. We are talking about a significant limitation, a significant anomaly, a significant puzzle, a significant unresolved question, I mean, in other words, we are talking about the inconsistent, right, unexplained phenomenon within existing knowledge domain. Right. And remember, when you're doing your PhD, you're contributing knowledge to a particular discipline, to a particular field, to a particular area. That area might be small, right? Or might not be very broad, but that's where you're contributing knowledge. And therefore, you must identify. Can somebody mute that mic, come here, right? So you are trying to deal with that significant inefficiency or unexplained situation or contradiction, and all these do exist, by the way. So in other words, once you have identified a practical research problem, right, that there is a low intake, right, of, let's say, technology, or low adoption, right? The adoption rates are low. That's very good, right? But now go to literature and find out, right, whether we do not have sufficient explanations about that adoption issue. Go and find out whether there are inconsistencies in the models that have been developed over years to try and explain adoption. Or go and find out whether this is unresolved scholarly issue, right? Is it an unresolved phenomenon, right? So at the end of the day, our objective is to create knowledge, right? In other words, you want to advance understanding in this area. You want to understand, you want to advance theory, you want to advance policy, you want to advance practice. and you want to advance methodology in this particular discipline. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a definition of a scholarly research problem. So you giving us a story of issues that are happening within an organization, right, is not sufficient to warrant that to be a scholarly research problem, right? It is very good that you are able to identify that, but consultants can actually deal with the problem. They can solve it. We don't need to spend 4 years, 5 years doing a PhD in that area, right? Because consultants are there, right? And they have the tools and they have the various interventions they can actually recommend to management to deal with that particular issue. So it becomes scholarly if existing models, existing theories, right, existing there are puzzles, right, surrounding that bit of phenomenon that will require someone to take around 4 years or 5 years and invest substantial resources to try and collect data and solve that particular issue, ladies and gentlemen. So it is very, very important. So the definition that I've just given you has a number of issues that I want you to think about, right? I don't know whether these exist on our slide here, right? The first issue is that the scholarly research problem that we are talking about here is that it is fundamentally a knowledge problem rather than merely a practical problem. It's a knowledge problem because you are able to go to literature, right, and scan through, right, that forest that exists. And it could be a forest of theories, could be a forest of empirical literature, right, where there are debates, there are disputes, there are unresolved puzzles, right, that actually explain adoption or the law adoption that you're talking about, right, or probably that is that talks about compliance issues if you are studying compliance, right? So in other words, that is one major dimension. The scholarly research problem, your scholarly research problem is fundamentally a knowledge problem rather than merely a practical problem, right? So the central issue here is not, it's not that something undesirable exists in society, but it is that existing knowledge is insufficient to explain that thing that is existing in society or community, right? Or the existing knowledge is insufficient to address it, right? And that's why you are undertaking a study in this area, trying to spend your 4 years, your 5 years, right? Depending on the college where you are, right? And how easy and difficult your discipline is, or again, depending on how fast you are able to grasp the issues, or probably how long, right, it will take you to break through in that area, right? So that is very important. Now, the second, right, again, dimension or characteristic of a scholarly research program is that this scholarly research program exists within a body of literature, a body of literature. Last time I remember when I was giving a lecture here, a student raised a question and he said, "Sir, right, I went to my supervisor and my supervisor told me, go and review literature." Right. I think that's a question that you asked. Go and review literature. Right. And then you are asking me, "Sir, is this okay?" Right. Is that where we should actually start when I do not even understand, right, the practical research problem? Right. And I remember explaining that very well and telling you why your supervisor will tell you to go and review literature. Now you can see it. When we are talking about a research problem, yes, you've got a practical research problem, but that practical research problem may not warrant a PhD. Unless you are able to convert it into a scholarly research problem And you do that by recognizing the fact that your research problem is actually a knowledge problem. It is fundamentally a knowledge problem. And then two, you are able to recognize the fact that that research problem of yours exists within a body of literature. And you not understand that exists within a body of literature unless you review literature. Now, one of the problems that we have at the PhD level is that after your master's, there's a general belief that you have mastered the basics of research, and therefore you can easily craft a research problem. That's why no one will ever teach you how to craft a research problem. If you come to me and I'm a supervisor, I'll tell you, you go and write down your statement of the problem, right? So when you come back, I say, this is not it. Go and look for this information. Go and look for this. Go and look for this. That's why some people spend months and months crafting research problem, because you never went through formal classes that tell you how to craft a research problem. And the only thing you've done is to cram, because someone told me that told you that a research problem must have the first paragraph says this, the second paragraph says this, the third paragraph says this, the fourth paragraph says this. So you start now cramming without knowing those things that must constitute a research problem. So you keep on discovering every now and then, after the time when they bring the opponent and the examiner, right? And then the examiner begins interrogating you and he says, but you don't have a research problem here, right? I actually remember in one of the Viva I attended, the examiners told a student, you don't have a research problem, right? And actually the opponent also said you don't have a research problem. And all the other people who were asking questions, the questions centered around the research problem, right? At the end of the day, once they dismiss your research problem, ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you that A, you don't have the objectives, because the objectives are derived from the statement of the problem. Now, the moment the problem disappears, you have no objectives, you have no hypothesis, you have no research questions. Even the theories you're applying them wrongly to explain a wrong problem. Actually, not even explain a wrong problem. You don't have a problem at all. So what are you explaining? Right. You have issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's always very important for you to understand that a scholarly research problem exists within a body of literature, right? So these problems that we are talking about do not arise in isolation. They emerge through engagement with the previous studies. So you must engage with the scholarly literature. You must engage with the theories, right? That's why in your statement of the problem, there must be a section where you're actually talking about a theory, even when that element has been presented in the background, because you use theories to explain, right, the constructs that you are going to use, depending on how you craft your background. So by the time you come to the statement of the problem, you have concretized the issue very well, and you have identified a puzzle already, or contradictions, or knowledge gaps within the knowledge domains, and those are the ones you actually present in the statement of the problem. So you engage with the previous studies, you engage with theories, you engage with the conceptual debates, right, that exist in literature, you engage with the methodological approaches and empirical findings. Again, you need to be very careful here. Whereas I'm mentioning all these things, I know that some of you will take this as a gospel according to Matthew or Mark, and say, we are told all these things must be there. So you come up with a very broad statement of the problem where you want to contribute to policy at the same time, contribute to practice, contribute to theory, contribute to, right. So you do not have to contribute to all these, right? But I'm saying that at least you must be able to make your statement of the problem scholarly, right? And that's the second dimension that we saw from this definition of a scholarly research problem. The third characteristic, ladies and gentlemen, that you may have noted from my definition of a scholarly research problem is that this scholarly research problem requires systematic investigation, right? It requires systematic investigation. And that's why you are calling it a scholarly research problem. First of all, you are locating your study in certain paradigms. Could be a positivistic paradigm, right? Or it could be logical positivistic paradigm, right? Or probably interpretivist paradigm, or maybe it borders two paradigms, or you are trying to integrate two paradigms, right, within one particular. I mean, that's okay as long as you're able to convince us that you are able to do it within that particular topic. After all, nobody ever gives you a topic. You are the ones who come up with your own topics. And our job as supervisors and doctoral committee is to help you, right, smoothen the journey that you are taking, right, by just guiding you on the topic that you have given yourself. It is a task that you give yourself. Our job is not to discourage you, right, but to guide you on how you can actually move on after the time when you reach your destination, right? So this is very, very important. So your scholarly research program requires systematic investigations. So questions can be answered through some of those techniques that you are very familiar with, for example, simple observation, and even there's common sense, there's logic in what you are doing, right? Or probably we can answer, right, your question through by using the lens of existing knowledge, right? And if we discover that existing knowledge does not adequately explain, that is where our contribution comes in. So that your work now qualifies as a doctoral level research program. So, ladies and gentlemen, when your supervisors and doctoral committee members ask you a question as to whether this is a PhD or a master's research, they are not abusing you, and you should always be positive about these things. So, because when they look at the way, right, that you have crafted your background, the way you have crafted your statement of the problem, and the way you are advancing, they do not see this, right, as PhD, but they see it as masters. Because at the master's level, you are appreciating the knowledge, right, and you are more or less celebrating the theories that you have or knowledge that has been put down. So there is no critical engagement with theory, no critical engagement with scholarly literature, and no critical engagement with the realities out there. So we simply take things as a given. So they are not really abusing you, but they are actually bringing you to a certain level, telling you that you probably have to do much more than what you are doing around here. So the fourth characteristic that comes from this definition that I gave you is that research problems must have a significance, right? And that's why my second slide there, if you recall, was why this topic matters. And the topic here that I'm talking about is what constitutes a scholarly research program. Why does it matter, right? Why this topic, right? It's because most times the problem is unclear, right? So in other words, our fourth characteristic here is that the research problem that you have come up with has significance. In other words, you have identified a deficiency in a literature, right? And that deficiency that you have identified matters to scholars, ladies and gentlemen, right? It matters to practitioners. It matters to policymakers. It matters to society, right? In other words, you are contributing to solving societal problems, right? And that's why the other day when you attended lectures at Makerere, when we are taking you through advanced research methods, you remember the things that we talked about. And I think the director also emphasized that and said, you must be able to contribute, right, to solving societal problems, country problems, right? So that's why we always encourage you to start with the SDGs at a higher level, right? From the SDG, you come to the African Union, right? If you also have regional blocks, right, and frameworks, Then if you are in East Africa, you're talking about the East African community, right? If you are the other side, you're talking about ECOWAS. If you are, I mean, then from there you come to the national, right, documents that exist, right? We'll be talking about Vision 2040, right? Then from there we shall be talking about NDP, right? The current NDP. And then from there we shall come down to those specific aspects. So we are not making life very hard for you, right? But we are making life easy for you so that you are able to identify, right, how you are going to contribute in solving societal problems. In other words, your statement of the problem that you are coming up, which is scholarly, and I'm talking about scholarly. If I forget the word scholarly, please, and I only use the word research problem or statement of the problem, right, at some stage, always add that word scholarly. You just know that I've just forgotten to use it, but the word is there, right? And I'm emphasizing that word scholarly research problem, scholarly statement of the problem. I'll be coming to that because we begin by identifying the problems which are scholarly in nature, and then we craft, right, a statement of the problem, right, without this research problem, which is identified, of course, through a number of ways, right from the other philosophers that we saw, Karl Popper's, Thomas Kuhn, Imre Lactos, Loudon, plus a number of others, right? Those are just examples. They are not the only philosophers that we have had over the years that have contributed to the development of the discipline or knowledge, right? So I'm bringing to your attention the fact that your research problem will always have the philosophical, right, perspective or perspectives, right? And those philosophical perspectives are very important, right? But then that should drive you towards this end where we are, right? So that is the fourth element, right? Now, the fifth element, ladies and gentlemen, I will not be able to go through all, but a scholarly research problem, right, should create an opportunity for contribution. And that's why they'll always ask you a question, what is your contribution to knowledge? So there must be that opportunity, right, to contribute knowledge, right, to the existing body of knowledge. Reuben, please mute, right? So that is very, very important, right? The opportunity to contribute knowledge. And it doesn't matter, right? Knowledge is incremental, as I've been telling you. You don't have to say a lot, right? And convince everyone that you have solved all the problems that exist within an organizational setting. It's very hard, right? Or maybe in the area of finance, in the area of governance, in the area of politics, that you want to solve all the political problems in this world. No. Knowledge grows incrementally. So knowledge is incremental, right? And that's how disciplines have been developed over the years. They just add a small bit, right? So, but what they want to see, what the doctoral committee members, right, and the examiners and the opponent, what they want to see is your contribution, right? However little that contribution is, it must be there, right? So the purpose of doctoral research is not merely to describe reality, but to advance knowledge. I know some of you are very good at describing realities within the organizations, realities within communities, realities within political settings, right? So we do not expect you to be experts, right? You can leave that to other people, right? Those who stopped at the master's level, they are also very good, incidentally, in terms of describing those particular issues. For some of you who have been listening to this gentleman, well, I will not mention his name, but he's a politician, right? The way he articulates issues and the way he describes those issues, right, he's spot on, right? And if you have been following politics in Uganda and you listen to him, he's very, very good, but that's not doctoral material. So leave leave that to those individuals, and that's where they are, and that's where they belong. And that's why I like the other gentleman who was the minister of ICT, now has been transferred to Minister of Health. Listen to his reasoning, right? You'll see some bit of scholarship in what he says. So he's not arguing at this parliament level, right? But he goes beyond, right? The way he analyzes, the way he synthesizes, only that he's within a particular community that cannot understand him, right? But the good thing that I like is that he's very, very good in terms of articulating issues and in terms of defending his issues. But once in a while he becomes a little bit proud, and he says that these are not my level; these are just A level or O level people, right? They are not at my level, doctoral level, kind of thing. But of course, that is another bit now, the other side overboard. All right. One of the things you learn after completing your PhD is that you are going to become very humble, right? A PhD will humble you a little bit, right? But nonetheless, it will not take away the fact that your level of reasoning, your level of thinking, your level of critiquing issues will be far the level that is given by others, ladies and gentlemen. So that is another. Stephen Echonyu, can someone help me mute? Stephen Echonyu, you have the co-host rights. Just check and see and help me do that. Right. There's one scholar I left you with last time. I don't know whether you still remember, right? Maxwell, right? Maxwell has written a lot of work, right? I may not remember the year in which he made statements relating to the statement of the problem, right? But he makes a fundamental statement, right? When he says that research problems in this case, consist of something that is not adequately understood and that requires explanation. So he's able to bring in that perspective of scholarship, right? Because your research problem or research problems in general, right, will consist of something. That something must be there. That's something that is not adequately understood by the scholarly community, right? And that's something that's not understood by the scholarly community requires further explanation, or requires explanation in this case. And that's where he actually supplements the work of Cresswell. And Cresswell, that's a book I gave you some time back, who actually defines a research problem as an issue, right, or probably a concern that needs to be addressed because a gap between what is known and what needs to be known exists. So there's a gap between what is known, right, and that gap between what is known and what needs to be known will constitute a research problem, right, ladies and gentlemen. So that is why it is very, very important for us to go through a scholarly research problem, right? And of course, I've already gone through the features, right? So ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to move to another important aspect of a research problem before we embark on the journey of crafting these research problems. We shall begin by crafting problems and then later on turn these into research problems at a later stage. If time allows today, we shall be able to do it. Dole, please mute. Right. So if time allows today, we might be able to cover this and then after break, go into the other one. But if we don't have sufficient time, ladies and gentlemen, to deal with that, right, then we shall be looking at it later on, right? So let's look at a topic, right? And here, my major objective is to try and distinguish topics from issues, from gaps and research problems, right? So, and of course, the reason why I feel it's important for us to distinguish this is because students, especially PhD students, frequently confuse these four distinct concepts. Right, they are concepts. And if you recall last time when I was taking you through conceptualization, operationalization, and the measurement, I told you in research we deal with the concepts. You begin with the concepts, right? And once you conceptualize, that means you are providing operational definitions to your concepts, right? You go into conceptualization, right? Then after that, you operationalize, you unpack your concepts, right? And some of the concepts are very narrow, while others are very broad. Some actually easily turn into variables, while others turn into constructs before they are turned into variables. I'm sure that was discussed in our lecture when we met at Makerere, right? So I want us to look at the distinction here, right? What is a research topic, right? Now, a topic usually is a broad area of interest, and I think I gave you examples, right, of topics, right? I mean, employee engagement, and I'm sure you've seen some of the topics, right, which are pursued by some students, especially at MOOCs, right? Someone presents the criteria, I mean, the criterion variable alone, and it says employee engagement in the manufacturing firm, right? That means he's actually dealing with he's actually stating the criterion. So it doesn't give you the other variables and you don't even know how they interact, right? So that is a topic. It's a broad interest, sorry, a broad area of interest, right? So that is broad. Someone talks about financial inclusion, right? Right. Financial inclusion. Right. So a topic in this case, ladies and gentlemen, merely indicates, right, that broad area or what I call subject area. It does not identify a problem. Right. For some of you who believe that when I look at the topic, right, I'll be able to tell the problem. It may not be possible. It may not be possible because it is very broad, right? Financial inclusion is broad. Employee engagement is broad, right? And incidentally, you could have some bit of different conceptualizations depending on the discipline where you're contributing knowledge, right? Maybe engagement in politics might be a little bit different from engagement in organizational settings or organizational behavior. Tugume Bernard, please mute. Right. So that is a topic. Now, of course, the other issue, as I said, is what we call the practical issue, right? So a practical issue relates to a challenge occurring in the real world, right? And examples may include things like high employee turnover. That's an issue in a particular organization, right? Or if we deal with the financial inclusion, someone will say low financial inclusion, right? So you'll find someone with a topic talking about financial inclusion, right? But he will not give you the direction, whether it is positive or negative, whether it's talking about low financial inclusion or high, because I mean, if you are studying companies, for example, you can study high performing companies, right? Another one may study low performing companies. You know the study that was carried out by Tom Peters and Waterman in the 1980s, a gentleman who studied highly performing companies in the United States. I think it took a sample, if I'm not mistaken, of around 60, I think, if not 45. I can't remember the actual figure. But I looked at the book that they later wrote and the earlier book that had results, right, where they talk about the sample and so forth before they came up with another version of the book that is largely motivational in nature, right, In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters and Waterman, right. But they started high-performing companies in the US, right, and they came up with some statements telling now companies, right, or CEOs of companies that if you want to succeed, stay close to your knitting, do this and the other, right? The customer is very important and things like that, right? You may not know where those phrases came from, but it was as a result of research. But if you look at the methodology they used, right, it's a methodology that is a fit in identifying highly performing companies, right? And so if you want to study high performing companies, do not again come up with a sample that has poor performing companies and high performing companies, because Tom Peters and Waterman and the rest of the researchers who have done studies in such areas do not actually do that, right? So again, that is very important as a methodological issue. So, but the moment you start bringing financial inclusion, that becomes a practical issue, right? And I assure that your statistics back you up. Again, help us mute that person who is making a lot of noise, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that will work, right, for us. So that's a practical issue, right? Unemployment, for example, right? If you are experiencing high levels of unemployment, then that's a practical issue, ladies and gentlemen. Right, now after practical issue, we go to a research gap, right? What is that research gap? A research gap refers to something that remains unknown. And I will not go into details of identifying research gaps today, because you and me know very well that there are various types of gaps, right, that you can actually identify. And whereas those gaps have been talked about, I don't expect your PhD to have all the research gaps, right? Because if you look at literature, I think they mention around 13 research gaps. Some are methodological, others are practical, others are theoretical, others are, I mean, there are many, right? Now, if you include all of them, I can assure you are going to lose focus at the end of the day, right? Even when you come to the methodology, you might be confused, right? What methodology you are going to use, ladies and gentlemen, right? So those are research gaps, right? Something that remains unknown within a particular scholarly domain, right? It could be in governance. Again, governance is very broad. You might identify a narrow area of governance, right? Or if you go to financial inclusion or inclusion is very broad, right? Financial inclusion is not very specific, but at least you are moving towards finance. Someone will know that you're talking about financial inclusion. But even then within this, you can narrow it down to something, right? So a gap is there. For example, if you go to literature and you discover that there are limited studies on refugee entrepreneurship, right? Or maybe the studies exist, but there's something that has not been explored in refugee entrepreneurship, then that becomes a gap, right? Or maybe you are looking at adoption of artificial intelligence among SMEs, right? And you discover that few studies actually examine this. And for you to be able to tell that a few studies examine this, you must carry out a systematic literature review, right? Or state-of-the-art reviews, right? I know that last week, I think Joseph said that he will be able to, was it Joseph or the gentleman who facilitated the first session? That was Emo Jong, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that we shall be looking at all these types of reviews at some stage. Right, state-of-the-art reviews, for example, right, plus a number of others or meta-analytic reviews. So unless you've managed to do a review, you cannot simply make a statement that a few studies, right? So, but once you do that, you know that there's a methodology you have used to identify journal articles, you've done some bit of screening, and you are able to tell, right, with a certain level of certainty that there are actually a few studies in this area, right? Or probably you'll even be able to see areas where you don't have research studies, you don't have empirical studies. So that means that you can undertake or position your study or your studies in that area. So as we can see, research gaps, ladies and gentlemen, identify missing knowledge, right? Knowledge is missing. We do not have sufficient knowledge to explain. But here I should caution you, ladies and gentlemen, not all gaps are important. And that's why you must actually choose gaps that you're going to study, right? So let's talk about now scholarly, right, research problems. Again, just as we transit from the topic as we saw, right, we need to move from practical issues, research gaps, to what we call scholarly research problem or problems, right? So this is where I started from, right? And I told you that a scholarly research problem links a number of areas, and you need to know these areas that are linked by a scholarly research program. One area is an important phenomenon, right? That important phenomenon could be in financial inclusion, could be somewhere else, maybe adoption of AI, etc. But that area is considered to be very important to a community, society, a country, or things like that. If a country or a community needs to develop, it must adopt AI, for example, right? So it links that important phenomenon to an identifiable knowledge deficiency. So you are able to link it to what exists within literature out there, and you must be able to articulate a theoretical significance, right? Why should we bother as scholars? Maybe it is something that should bother managers within a particular setting, so that they actually bring in consultants so that they can actually recommend interventions within a particular organization. But since we are scholars, right, we know that existing models, existing theories, existing frameworks inadequately explain, or there are contradictions, or there are boundary conditions, right, within which these theories operate, and beyond which they cannot actually offer, right, meaningful solutions to the problems that we have within our communities. So that means that we are linking an important phenomenon to a knowledge deficiency that we have identified within literature, and meaning that our problem has a theoretical significance, right? But not only a theoretical significance, it must also have a practical significance, because the community, right, must be able to use the knowledge. Policy makers must be able to use the knowledge, or probably the findings of our research. And that is why now Makerere University actually emphasizes the fact that on your doctoral defense, right, you will have, for example, the examiner, an examiner. Can someone please mute Tumaini? Ladies and gentlemen, mute Tumaini. Right. So I was talking about the PhD defense at Makerere. We ordinarily have the external examiner and also internal examiners, not only one, but a number of them, right? And then in addition to that, you have an opponent, right? Right. And then the community, right, must come in. But before the community comes in, we must bring someone from policy, right? Because you must be able to contribute to policy. So you need to interrogate existing policies and recommend things that will create some policy shifts, right, or interventions or revisions, right, while at the same time solving problems within a particular industry. So an industry practitioner will also be invited. So when they bring these issues, they're not making life hard for you not to get a PhD, right? And I've seen many students at some stage coming up and saying, well, the opponent almost took away my PhD, right? The objective of the opponent is not to pull your PhD and take it away from you, right? But it's to really engage you and confirm that you have reached that level. Is just playing the devil's advocacy perspective, right? And then the policy fellow also wants to see whether governments, right, can actually use your findings in one way or the other to create what we call informed policies for the country, right, in that particular area. I think what they're doing is very correct, only that we misunderstand, and because we are not trained, right, so we keep on discussing and, of course, demonstrating that universities are becoming very hard. But, on the contrary, they are providing training avenues, right, or classes for you to appreciate why these things are very important so that you can easily get your PhD, right, while at the same time contributing to industry, contributing to policy, and also contributing to the scholarly community where you build frameworks, where you build policies that can actually be used by future scholars. Right. One thing you should not forget, as we saw some time back when we were defining the issue of theory, right? Some people believe that theory is abstract, when the actual sense that theory is not abstract, right? I think I demonstrated to you at some stage when I told you that's a net that you cast out in the wider environment to catch reality and be able to understand it or explain that particular reality. So if it is a net that you throw out with a view, right, of explaining that reality using a particular paradigm, right, or knowledge domain, then it is no longer abstract. It is real. A theory is real. It is not really abstract. And before a theory emerges as a theory, it begins operating as a model at some stage, right? And I think that's why we had a question at some stage, someone asking that is it advisable that I use a theory? I use. Can you mute Mose? Right? Please do that. I think we are likely to have interruptions from time to time. But that is a question. And there's another who asked a question, which I attempted to, I did not actually answer that one for obvious reasons, because I knew the person who asked the question, and I thought that I should meet the person and have a discussion over it. The student was asking, I have used one theory, but there's also a model, right, that I'm using. And most of the things seem to be explained by a model. Now, if they ask me my anchor theory, which can I say it is an anchor model, my work is anchored in a model rather than a theory, or it is anchored in a theory, but that kind of thing, right? And that is a very simple question that can be answered at some stage, right? But anyway, it is quite important for us to know what a scholarly research problem is. I think now we understand it, right? And then we can use an example, right? Remember, we are dealing with a problem, right? But before that, if I could take you back a bit here, right? Whereas I said that this could be a topic, financial inclusion, right? But you saw this on the screen, right? Where you discover that existing theories inadequately explain sustained inclusion. Whereas you're talking about financial inclusion, your concern is sustained financial inclusion, right? And then that is becoming a little bit specific. So in other words, you have the theories and you know them and you have interrogated them, right, to try and explain this, but you have found this theory inadequate. So that means there's need to come up with a theory or even extend existing. Someone mute Chasukwa, right? So at that level,
yes, that's correct.
Yeah, please mute so that we do not interrupt the lecture. You'll be given an opportunity to speak. Right. So we move to that level. You start with the topic, then you come to the problem. Right. Then later on, you craft a statement of the problem. Right. Now, of course, this is another example of a practical issue versus a scholarly problem. Corruption exists, right? And then there's this issue, why corruption persists despite reforms. I think this is a question that we've been trying to answer. Even the other week, we used this very example, right? There's corruption, fine, and there are models that actually and theories that explain corruption. But our concern is that even when we have these regulatory frameworks in place, right? Got, for example, the leadership code, you've got anti-corruption, you've got all these other things, all of them, but we see still corruption persists despite the reforms. So in other words, now you are moving towards a problem that requires, and you have evidence that even with the existence of these things, you have this. So someone will say, yes, they exist, but maybe the enforcement is the issue, right? Or preferential enforcement, or the issue of networks, etc., etc. And then there you are coming close to the issue of the gaps. You can see that, right? So I think let's have an illustration here, right? Before we look at the components that constitute the problem, right? So if we take an example of financial inclusion, the way we have been articulating it, and I know there's someone here that is studying financial inclusion, right? And he was telling me that for him, he's interested in marginalized communities, right? And he was looking at some of the models that exist within the financial institutions, right? He was quoting a model from ABSA, quoting a model from Stanchart and other financial institutions, right? So, well, he has that kind of model. Now, of course, you may discover that in this area, digital financial services have expanded significantly across developing economies, right? When you talk about Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, right, and a few other countries, find that digital financial services exist. Paul Buhenga, kindly mute, right? So these are there, right? There's an expansion, right? But despite this expansion, financial exclusion remains prevalent among vulnerable populations. If you're looking at the youth, you're talking about the ladies or women in this case, or you're talking about refugees, you are talking about what is the other vulnerable? Disabled communities, etc. You discover that financial exclusion in this case is, prevalent or remains prevalent among these. And then when you go to literature, you discover that existing studies have focused primarily on access and adoption of digital financial services, right? And of course, all these studies seem to provide limited understanding of how certain things like, for example, trust, maybe institutional quality and digital literacy interact, right, to try and influence sustained financial inclusion among these marginalized communities, maybe the refugees, maybe the disabled people, etc. You discover that we are moving towards a scholarly problem, right? We are moving towards a scholarly problem because this issue here that I've just presented to you identifies a phenomenon, right? Again, it identifies a knowledge deficiency, right? Despite the fact that I've not cited. Then it also identifies or provides actually theoretical significance. It has also practical implications and potential contribution. So in other words, this is something that is very close to a scholarly problem. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to rest for about a minute or two and then get feedback from you. And then we can actually start from there when we look at the 5 essential elements of scholarly research problem, right? And of course, these are the ones, and we're going to look at one by one. Right, so you can go ahead and speak. You can go ahead and speak. Right. Anyone who wants to contribute? Right. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Prof.
If you have a question, if you have a comment, it could be an addition to what I have just said. If you believe that you will be able to add something, please go ahead and speak.
It is a kind of a guidance, Prof, from you in relation to what should entail the problem statement for a PhD scholar. This is how I have understood it, that in as much as we need to see the practical problem and the theoretical problem, what I'm trying to understand here is, can one integrate the two such that when one is reading, you do not have them separate? In other words, what I'm saying, that the practical problem and the theoretical problem should be feeding into each other.
Yeah.
Your guidance, Prof.
Yes, yeah, I think you've said it. You've said it all, right? It is true.
Okay.
There must be a practical problem, but it must be of concern because not every practical problem requires investigation. And I've been saying that some of the problems require consultants. So you could as well tell management to hire a consultant to deal with that problem. But as long as it is of significance to the community, society, and also scholarship, and you are able to bring in systematic investigation and also contribute to knowledge, if you look around, because you have tools that have been developed over in scholarly literature, right? And they are in terms of explaining that particular problem, then you go ahead. So in other words, you must have that right practical element, but it must also have the other aspect that you have mentioned. So it is true. But one thing you should know is that we haven't crafted a statement of the problem yet. We are looking at elements of a scholarly research problem. Scholarly research problem. So we shall be crafting one at some stage, and I will be showing you one, not because it is the best, right, but because it brings out some of the elements. I know you can make that better. I'm told that even the best can be made better. Whether that is correct English or not is another story altogether. But I've seen those expressions. The best can be made better. Right. Any other question, ladies and gentlemen? Or maybe just to provide more examples to what our colleague there did ask, right? I have a student who is working on graduate employability, right? And of course, the way he articulates the issue is in terms of the emergence of graduate employability as a major concern globally, as higher education institutions, of course, face increasing pressure to produce graduates capable of adapting to rapidly changing labor markets. But the student also reviews it and discovers that despite increased investments in higher education, employers continue to report significant gaps between graduate capabilities and workplace expectations. Right, and I'm just giving you a few aspects that I remember, but of course his problem is far better than the way I am describing it here. Right, but the student goes ahead and says he wants to look at issues of course, he looked at reports that are available, right? Government report, industry reports. He looked at international statistics. He looked at policy documents, and he looked at scholarly literature, right? Now, of course, what we see in what he describes at that level is that there is a knowledge gap, right, that he managed to identify, of course, through the lenses or the lens that the student is using. So the knowledge deficiency was identified through the empirical gap, right, the theoretical gap, the contextual gap, right, and he was able to demonstrate why existing knowledge is inadequate, right. And of course, he also articulated the consequences of not addressing the problem. If we don't deal with the problem right now, we are likely to have issues later on. So I think we see here that the student was able to integrate a number of things that matter, right? Another comment, let me see what is the chat room here. I can see many, many messages. I don't know whether there are questions within these messages, right? Because I can see there are over 40 or 50. I hadn't opened any one of them, right? All right, I think there's a question, right? Or a few questions that I can see here, and the rest are just general messages, right? The first question, hey, can someone help us? Right, I've started. I'm right to state. Am I right to state my topic directly as high financial? Right. I think we shall come to that because we have a session where we are going to where we shall have problems, right? Where a student starts with a problem. I think last time one student was supposed to give us her description of a problem, right? Okay. The other one, a theory is a set of logically connected, right? Yes, all those things exist in literature, right? All those things exist. Can we have a recording? Stewart, kindly share the books. The books I've already shared them, but I can still send a few. Daniel Mugoya, how does he then ensure he contributes to the community? This is an excellent question. Contribution may occur at 4 levels, Mugoya. One is theoretical contribution, that is extending or refining existing theories. 2, logical contribution, introducing new approaches to studying a phenomenon. The third one could be policy contribution, informing decision makers. 4, we can have practical contribution, improving organizational societal outcomes. Lilian Balunji, I've started thinking I don't yet have a scholarly research program. I can say, well, this realization is actually a sign of doctoral progress. I think you are doing very well. Many doctoral students begin with, I have it. Later they discover I have a practical issue. Eventually they realize I still don't have a scholarly problem, right? A scholarly problem, of course, as I said, exists when you can demonstrate what is right, what is already known, what remains unknown, and why the unknown matters. That's important. Ivan, should my topic be high financial inclusion, right? Generally avoid embedding assumptions in the title, right? When I gave you an example of Waterman, Thomas, Waterman, right? The In Search of Excellence, that is Tom Peters and Waterman, right? So when you look at the study, I think you need to read the book so that you understand exactly what we mean by someone studying high-performing institutions. So, but the advice I could give generally, avoid embedding what is this now? Avoid embedding assumptions in the title, right? High financial inclusion assumes a particular level of inclusion before investigation. The preference is financial inclusion and financial performance, right? or the relationship, or I mean, unless your theoretical framework specifically requires distinction between low, moderate, and high inclusion, avoid those assumptions. Alec, how would you know a certain aspect of knowledge is not well understood by the scholarly community? Alec, my answer is that you know a phenomenon is not well understood when the literature reveals a number of things. One, contradictions, right? Different studies actually produce conflicting findings, right? For example, some studies find innovation to improve performance, while others actually find no effect, right? You may have innovations, but performance does not actually. So those are contradictions. It means there are disputes, there are debates, unfinished debates within literature, meaning that you have a contradiction. The other issue could be in terms of fragmentation, right? Many studies examine isolated pieces without coherent explanation. Help me mute that student. Kindly mute. Yeah. So when there is fragmentation, or probably there are contextual limitations as well. So most evidence certainly comes from context different from yours. Still noise is right. Can someone, okay. Make sure, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you mute, right, your mics, otherwise you are going to disorganize us, right? The other one could be in terms of weak theoretical explanation, right? Existing theories explain only a part of the phenomenon and is unable to explain almost everything, right? Then, of course, the other one could be in terms of explicit calls for future research, and you pick these from journal articles which you read. You'll find all these things there. Mwerwa Temani is asking which gaps are important in scholarly writing, right? My response that not all gaps are equally valuable. Many students, of course, mistakenly believe that any gap justifies research. Now, if you want to do a very good doctoral thesis, your study should typically address one or a number of the following. One, theoretical gaps, where existing theories fail to explain a phenomenon adequately. Two, explanatory gaps, right? We know what happened, but we do not have explanations as to why these things happened. So those are what we call explanatory gaps. We know what happens, but not why. The contextual gaps, right? Knowledge from one context may not transfer to another quite easily and smoothly. The other ones, in terms of methodological gaps, existing methods fail to capture important aspects of reality, right? Then, of course, the other ones in terms of gaps, can you help me mute that person? So related stream of literature have never been connected, right? And of course, this is where you have a most powerful doctoral study, where you are able to integrate knowledge from. Okay, Mario Ouma, theoretical, practical, methodological gaps usually rank highly, right? Okay, Olivia Najemba, should the scholarly problem clearly indicate the research gaps and later clearly expound in the literature, and later clearly expound in the literature review, right? So Olivia, the statement of the problem should introduce and justify the knowledge deficiency that we've been talking about. The literature review should then systematically demonstrate that deficiency. Remember, the introduction is an introduction, and it cannot be a detailed section of literature review. It's an introduction. A statement of the problem is a statement, and that's why in some universities you'll be told you cannot go beyond half a page. Others will tell you 1 page. Others will say, well, 1.5 is acceptable. but they will not allow you to have a statement of the problem spanning 5 pages, right? So I think you are right. A statement of problem should introduce and justify the knowledge deficiency. Then the literature review should systematically demonstrate that deficiency, right? And think of it this way: statement of a problem, right? That makes the claim there's a significant knowledge deficiency. Literature review provides the evidence. Here is why that claim is true. If the gap appears for the first time in chapter 2, the problem statement is then weak, right? If the gap is fully proven in chapter 2, but absent in chapter 1, the study lacks coherence. So the two chapters should reinforce each other and they should speak to each other, ladies and gentlemen. So I think you can see that we provided responses to those particular questions. I think there are a few others here that I can respond to, and then we go for break for about 10 minutes. One is, please add me to the main group. Oh, that is Rita. I think some people will do that for you. They will add you there. Rose Namtevi, I beg your pardon on the types of contribution. Right, I think I've been talking about this: theoretical contribution, methodological contribution, empirical contributions, contextual contributions, practical contributions, policy contributions, etc. Abu Bakr Kalema, how can one read a 230-page book and comprehend it? Now, for you who are wondering about 230 pages, that is a very small book. Some of the theories are documented in volume 1 and volume 2, like personal constructs. Theory, which is documented in 2 volumes. I think the one volume has about 800 pages or 700. Then the other one has about 900 or 702 or 600. I think the smallest could be about 500. But my answer is that read the structure first, right? Then read chapter introductions and conclusions. Then identify key concepts, read actively, write while reading. Yeah, I mean, there are many other tools. You better ask the fellows who teach literature, and they'll be able to teach you, or English language. They'll teach you how to read, right? Mary Herbert, which type of gap is considered strongest in doctoral research? I think that has been answered. Isaac Okwara, impact of regulatory compliance on fraud risk management in commercial banks. To me, this is an excellent question, right? Now, the word impact can create problems for you. Why? Because it implies regulatory compliance causes fraud risk management outcomes, and that is a causal claim. Now, for you to establish causality rigorously, you would ideally require experimental evidence. You may also require longitudinal designs, and you may also require what you call stronger causal identification strategies. So I think my advice is that you actually avoid the word impact, right? For the time being, unless your supervisors and doctoral committee advise otherwise, and then they ask you to go into what we call experiments. If you carry out experiments, then that will be okay. Or maybe if not experiments, you can think about having longitudinal data. If it does exist, you have longitudinal designs, right? Or you can have other causal identification strategies that you can employ. Otherwise, avoid impact, the word impact. But otherwise, your topic is very good, right? To me, I think you'll be able to get something out of that. I think those are the only questions that I've managed to locate in the chat room, right? Now, other people are asking more questions. I think let's stop here for the time being, and then we pause. Otherwise, there are so many, and some of the questions may not be related to the issue that we are discussing at the moment. And if they are not related to the issues we are discussing, then we are likely to have an issue here. All right, or Mario, okay, Namogaya Faith, right? Mari Herbert, I think these are the ones. Percy Georgie, elaborate more on the last gap. where related stream of literature have not been linked, right? Okay, let me just use an example for Percy. Maybe I did not say much about this, right? Where you have an integrative gap, right? Or literature integration gap. Now, of course, this usually occurs when two mature bodies of literature have evolved independently. But when you examine or critically assess, they are more or less explaining the same phenomenon. Take an example of employability research that I did talk about, right? The first stream of literature from career. Can someone help me mute that person? Please, 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 please mute that. Okay. The first stream of literature comes from career adaptability literature. They focus on concern, they focus on control, issues of curiosity and confidence. Then you have the second stream of literature, right? The second stream could be coming from entrepreneurial alertness literature. So they focus on things like environmental scanning, information processing, and also opportunity recognition, right? Now, of course, what is happening is that these two branches or fields are operating separately. And one could actually ask the question, does entrepreneurial alertness explain how career adaptability translates into employability? Right. Now, if no one has integrated this literature, a scholarly opportunity exists, right, for you to merge these two areas, right? I could also give you another example for those who are doing procurement. The first stream of literature and procurement research could be institutional theory. Now, institutional theory, right, maybe attempts to explain a number of things, including compliance and so forth. Now, the second stream of literature could be looking at behavioral ethics literature, right, where they attempt to explain ethical decision making. I forget the person who has been very instrumental in this area of ethical decision making. So, researchers then maybe have been studying these two areas independently. Now, a doctoral student might ask, how do institutional pressures and ethical cognition jointly shape procurement outcomes? So the integration here may help you generate entirely new explanations, right? Those are examples, and we have so many other examples, ladies and gentlemen. But I think in the interest of, since we've been here for now about 1.5 hours, let's take a break for 10 minutes. It is now 10:38. We return at 10:48. 10:48. 10:38 now, we return at 10:48. And then we shall finish up this aspect and then work on something else. So let's enjoy your break and let's return at 10:48. Right. Bye.
You want your phone to remain on because it is a break, there's nothing you are hearing. Your data is not going for nothing. Hmm? Inechokwetonga uweka wabaziza wengi inechokwetonga uweka wabaziza wengi I'm asking you that the data of headquarters are in your home. The headquarters of data are in your home. Where you live Zoom and they are not listening. You choose to live something there as if before you have freedom. Everybody even has gone for break. You are the only one who's not attending who's on.
Please, we don't want to listen to your private conversation. Thank you.
Let's mute our mics, please.
More than enough.
All right, welcome back from your break. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed your break. Right, and now we are ready to proceed. Right. Let me share my, let me use the slide, the share mode. Right. Now, if there are questions, please make sure that you post those questions in the chat room, possibly when we are done. And today, I don't think I will go beyond this. The other element will be covered next time. So we were dealing with the scholarly research problem, and now we want to look at the 5 essential elements, right, of a scholarly research problem, right? And I think these are very important because we must know them so that when you are crafting your problem, you know exactly what to include in your problem, right? Remember, we are still dealing with the problem. Then later on, we refine it into what we call statement of the problem, right? And I think we should not confuse the two. Although I may actually use the two terminologies here interchangeably, but later on, I'll be able to present to you a statement of the problem that incorporates all these. So as you can see, a genuine scholarly, I call it genuine scholarly research problem, contains five fundamental elements, right? And I think you can see these 5 fundamental elements. Knowledge. It's a techno, please mute. Right, significance is another issue, relevance and researchability, right? So those are the 5 components. So we begin with the first element, which is existing knowledge, right? Now, of course, a scholarly research problem cannot exist in a vacuum. It cannot exist in the absence of existing knowledge. So that is why when you're writing as a researcher, you are first of all, you have to demonstrate what is already known, right? And then when you establish that knowledge base, you are able to build on it by identifying a deficiency, right? So that is why we believe that doctoral research builds upon accumulated scholarship rather than beginning from scratch, unless you want to be the Isaac Newtons and a few other fellows there who simply broke into an area, right, with the new knowledge and that new knowledge was taken on. Right. So at this level, we expect you to engage with the literature. Right. So in other words, this is very important. And I think if you recall very well, right, when we were in Makerere, I gave an example of Einstein, right, and Isaac Newton when I was trying to explain certain paradigms, right. Einstein's theory of relativity, and someone mute Namugaya faith, right? So, of course, we begin with if we take an idea of Isaac Newton, right? And we know his famous observation. Paji, please mute. Right. Right. Paji is becoming a thorn in people's flesh.
I have muted him. I have muted Maggie.
So I am actually asking members we've had a series of interruptions, and sometimes these interruptions cause problems, right? But anyway, we are saying that we start with knowledge, existing knowledge, right? So you must review it, right? So that's why you must demonstrate what is known, and then indicate that you are going to build, right, on the existing body of knowledge. That means you are adding something. And that's what I did indicate earlier on as knowledge growing incrementally. And when we say knowledge grows incrementally, we are not talking about knowledge that is maybe regional or community specific, that, you know, no research has been done in Uganda, no research has been done in among the Bateso or something like that, or the Itesots. So knowledge is universal, right? We all contribute to universal knowledge. So meaning that there must be a gap at that level, right? But if you identify, for example, a theory that has explained a number of things very well, right, within the developed world context, but for you, you have identified certain things within your communities that can't be explained, right, by this particular theory, again, you are contributing towards the extension of this particular theory or the development of another model that will better explain your context. Then that is okay if you're able to link it up to that kind of thing. But if you are not able to do that, we have a problem, right? So that's why we, I'm sure you've heard of a statement, I think from Isaac Newton, right? When he talks about scientific progress, right? And he says that scientific progress is able to go on because, right, scholars stand on the shoulders of giants. So standing on the shoulders of giants simply means that you are able, right, to identify yourself with a certain knowledge domain and knowledge in that particular area. And then when you review it, you are able to add something, right? And what you are adding is probably incremental in that case. So I think I don't need to give examples in this area, right? Because I've already given them. When I use the example of financial inclusion, again, Joan's mic is misbehaving. Kindly help me to mute Joan. Kindly help me to mute Joan. Otherwise, it might take me a minute by first of all unsharing the slides so that I locate the mic for me to. I gave many of you right to help me mute those mics.
Yeah, I've done that, Doctor.
Okay.
I've done that.
I was thinking of unsharing and probably changing the settings so that all of you are muted, so that you cannot unmute yourself, right? But I think you help me. If you have co-host rights, you have the rights to help us. Right. Okay, let's leave that alone and go to the second thing, because these interruptions are becoming numerous the way I see. I think people are tired. Right. How I wish you simply log out. Right. And you give space. Right. The second element is what we call knowledge deficiency. Right. And that is the heart of the research problem. Knowledge deficiency is the heart of a research problem, right? Now, this certainly represents the core as you know it. It identifies what remains unknown. Again, it is through critical engagement with the literature that you are able to identify what remains unknown, what remains inadequately explained, right, can still be identified by you. What remains contradictory is another issue, and what remains unresolved. So without a knowledge deficiency, then there is no research problem, ladies and gentlemen. If you recall some time back, I told you that when you review literature, there are ways of problematizing literature. And one of them is what we call progressive coherence. You show progression in knowledge, but you also indicate, right, what you are going to add, right, to the existing body in terms of progression of knowledge, right. The other one is synthesized coherence, right, and that is where you pick knowledge from a number of disciplines, and this has been happening, by the way. You pick knowledge from psychology, apply it to accounting, you apply it to medicine, to explain the behavior of patients or even medical doctors or practitioners in that area, right? So in other words, you pick areas that seem to be distant to one another. I think when I was in Makerere, I used a very good example of homeostasis. I think you still remember that concept, homeostasis, right? That is a medical terminology where the body is self-regulating, right? Using some kind of the concept that you learn from physics, where you have a thermostat and so forth. So the body has a way of regulating itself through sweating, through a number of other things, related things. So, of course, once the body can no longer do that, you are in trouble. And then the process becomes a little bit manual. So they have to give you either tablets, or they have to tell you, you do this and the other, and you have to start now bothering, right, about your health and things like that. Otherwise, I mean, that means it can no longer reach that level. Now, this concept, right, if you go to organizational literature, it is being studied in psychology, it's being studied, sociology, it is being studied. Now you find the whole concept of homeostasis. So that is synthesized coherence, right? Knowledge is picked from the one discipline, right? But because of similarities in concepts, right, in methodologies, because of similar methodologies and things like that, you find that you can transfer knowledge from one discipline to another discipline. Right, so that is synthesized coherence. Right, now the third one is what we call non-coherence, where you find that there are disputes and debates, right, that is within literature, right. Again, that's where you'll find all these things, right, including deficiencies. So that means that your study is located in a largely disputed area, and you must know the purpose of your research then, right. You'll be contributing knowledge, but your contribution will not be the same as the other fellow who is contributing in the area of progressive coherence, right? Again, you must tell us the paradigm that will dominate your study in that form. Right, so Deficiencies. Now, here you need to note the various types of deficiencies, ladies and gentlemen, right? And one of them is what we call empirical deficiencies, right? That's where you have insufficient evidence, right? So insufficient evidence, of course, here we mean that there's limited evidence regarding the construct that you are studying, right? And if you have limited evidence, then you must go ahead and work on it. Now, the second one is what we call theoretical deficiencies, right? Where theories provide inadequate explanations. I'll not go into details of that because we've been explaining it. The third one are what we call conceptual deficiencies, right? Where you have key concepts, right, within a particular discipline or theory, but those key concepts remain poorly understood, right? A very good example is digital resilience, right? For some of you who are working on digital resilience, go and Google and pick journal articles. You'll find people are talking about different things, right? Yet all of them are talking about digital resilience. So there you have conceptual deficiencies, and for some of you who want to undertake research in such areas that are replete with the confusion or deficiencies, that's one of them, right? And you'll also discover that other inconsistencies might be methodological, where existing methods fail to capture important dimensions, right? By the way, I was looking at studies that explain ability, and I discovered that there are about 5 models, right? And some of these models employ constructs that are totally different. They are not the same. So you, for example, if you're going to study employability, you must know, right, the area, right, and the domain, right, where you're undertaking the study. Otherwise, you're going to use the wrong dimensions. If you simply rush to the internet and pick anything that's available, of course, those will be dimensions of employability, but not for your right setting. So it's very, very important that you need to look at that. So most studies may rely on certain tools and methodologies that do not capture the dynamic processes or some of the constructs, right, that you want to study. Right. Others will include contradictory findings, right? All of those exist, right? So we now go to the third element, which is significance, right? Significance is very important, right? And significance matters because not every knowledge deficiency deserves investigation, right? There are so many knowledge deficiencies that we'll discover, but not all of them are worth the effort and investment in terms of time, in terms of energy, in terms of money, in terms of, right? So for you now, the question you must ask yourself is the so what question, right? So demonstrate why solving the problem is important, right? So when you solve that particular issue, that knowledge gap, that deficiency, something is likely to happen. So the so what becomes very important. And that's why later on, when we'll be dealing with the actual statements of the problem, we'll be telling you that this so what element must be embedded within your statement of the problem. You've said A, B, C, and D. So what? In other words, why should we bother? Right? Why should we be concerned? So that is another element. Another one is, of course, significance. Here, I'm not going into types of this significance. You know them: theoretical significance, practical significance, policy, methodological, and things like that. Right. So allow me to go to the fourth element, right? And that element is the scholarly relevance. So you are able to contribute to theory, you are able to contribute to literature, you are able to contribute to methods, right? So engage theories, ladies and gentlemen, engage concepts, engage debates, engage paradigms, and engage methodological discussions. So if you are able to include all of these in your work, then you would have done a very good job. So in other words, the contributions are there. The relevance would be in terms of relevance to theory, relevance to literature, relevance to methodology, relevance to conceptual development. Right. So characteristic number 5 or element number 5 is researchability. Can the problem be investigated? Right. It's very, very important. Right. Of course, please, someone mute Francis. Please, Francis Chumu.
Done, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. Right. So researchability matters and is important, and it refers to the extent to which a problem can be studied systematically, right? Of course, following the scientific processes and procedures. So in other words, you have
Professor, you are muted.
Professor, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
I think we should end the lecture because one of the co-hosts actually muted me and I was unable to unmute. So meaning that the law of diminishing returns has set in. So people are muting every other person. Instead of muting the ones who are making noise, you are muting the one who is presenting. That is unfortunate. Even last time, I think.
Could have been an error, Prof.
Yeah. So I was thinking that I stop here because I think
No, Doc, I think, Prof, I think it was a mistake. So you can continue now. Thank you.
Okay, so the fifth element, which is the last one, I hope I am still being heard, is researchability, right? So you are able to undertake, right, a scientific process of collecting data. So in other words, you have access to the population, right? Sometimes you choose a population that is not accessible, right? In which case you cannot actually sample quite easily, right? So access to data is very important, access to the population, appropriate methods, right? Of course, you can conceptualize, operationalize, and measure, right? All those particular aspects, right? So a research problem then, ladies and gentlemen, as we see, right, is very important, and there are those characteristics that we talked about that we need to think about. And once we have thought about those particular issues, then we are able to undertake research, ladies and gentlemen. So those are the 5 elements that constitute the research program. I think, as I said earlier on, we are getting tired, right? And so let me see if there are questions to deal with, and then we close. I'll have another session tomorrow for about 1 hour, maybe in the evening, where we shall deal with another dimension of the research program before we come to the statement of the program, ladies and gentlemen, right? So let me see in the chat room whether I have, let me first unshare. Have I unshared? I'm not very sure whether I have unshared here. Have I? Are you seeing
You have
me?
one share.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let me close. I wasn't very sure that I've done this. Right. All right. So the questions that I can easily see, let me see if there are questions. One is, okay, Muave. I think Muave, that question was answered. Which knowledge domain is your study? How do we deal with this question, Prof? I don't know whether you are asking me, my knowledge domain, or you are asking if someone asked that question. Mubaraka, are you around? So that you put you provide the context for your question. Which knowledge domain?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, Prof, I'm online.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Good morning, Prof, and
Morning.
colleagues online. Okay, I was listening to a defense yesterday in MOOPS, and the candidate was asked that question, and Prof, the candidate, I think, failed to answer that question. And equally myself, me, I'm studying employee adaptive performance in the hotel sector. And what could be my domain, knowledge domain, Prof?
Okay. I may not be able to answer your question. I mean, related to your what you are studying, because I haven't looked at your work, right? It's not as easy as that you just look at a topic, right? Because you can have a topic that is in the area of engineering or psychology. You know, some topics cut across. So we may not know, and you must be able to contribute to knowledge, right? So this is a very nice question because many students actually struggle with questions of this nature because they often think about variables before thinking about knowledge. Now, again, to answer your question quite easily, a knowledge domain refers to the body of knowledge to which your study primarily seeks to contribute. So when someone asks a question, which knowledge domain does your study belong to? They are essentially asking, which scholarly conversation are you joining? Right, and these are the things I've been discussing here. Let me just give you an example, right? If your topic is in the area of financial inclusion, and I've been using financial inclusion as an example, right? So the possible knowledge domain will be development finance, because that's where you start talking about financial inclusion. Now, of course, if your topic borders procurement compliance, and you're talking about procurement compliance, then your possible knowledge domain is public procurement. So your conversation is not in private procurement, it's not in the supplier development, it's not in supply chain, right? But simply public procurement. Now, of course, if you have a construct that also falls in the area of career adaptability, right, and you are dealing with that concept of career adaptability, then it means that you might be joining a conversation in career development, right? So you should always know, right, where you are contributing knowledge, right? That is now the discipline. The discipline where you are contributing knowledge is very important, right? If, for example, your variable, right, that you use to craft the problem and the statement of the problem, for that matter, is environmental justice, then environmental justice, the moment you begin talking about issues of fairness and so forth, then you enter into governance. But governance is everywhere because the fellows who are in law will talk about governance, the fellows who are in business, they'll talk about governance and so forth. So that means that at this level, you will be talking about concepts, right, that relate to environmental governance. So environmental governance is the possible knowledge domain right? If you are studying organizational learning, then you should know that organizational learning is part of organizational behavior. Therefore, that is where, so what you need to know here is when someone asks which knowledge domain does your study belong to, they are essentially asking which scholarly conversation are you joining. And I can assure you as a doctoral student, if you are unable to articulate the scholarly conversation you are joining, then you are in trouble. Then it means you didn't do the PhD yourself, right? You all know the scholarly conversation, and all these things I've been articulating here, how you can use, for example, how you can bring in the philosophical perspectives, right, to your problem, right? Right from the Karl Popper, Conjectures and Refutations, then Thomas Kuhn, right? The Structure of Scientific Revolution, Imre Lactose, right? Talking about a scientific program, Loudon solving a particular problem within communities, right? And then from there, you locate your study in a particular paradigm, right? Whether you are positivistic or logical positivism, right? Or interpretivist philosophical orientation or constructivist, right? Philosophical orientation. The moment you do that, and you know very well that you are in the area of medicine, because even medicine is very broad, right? Because you might go into behavioral, right, medicine, but you can also go into anthropological medicine, right? If that's where you are, then you are contributing. That's this. I mean, that's the scholarly conversation that you are joining in anthropological medicine. But even then, within that, there are certain fields that you are going to fill. So these become very, very important, and you should always answer that question, right? And those are very simple questions that they ask you during the Viva, by the way. So you cannot say that you know even you fail to answer it, right? The problem is that we do not know what we are doing because we do a PhD mechanically, right? I mean, the whole process becomes mechanical, and we do not know why we are engaged in that kind of thing, right? So, of course, the question that you should ask yourself, my friend, the one who has asked me that particular question, is you identify the domain, right, in terms of where your primary contribution is supposed to lie, right? So which domain is my primary contribution intended for, right? And a very good test is, if my PhD study is published today, which academic community would be most interested in reading it? Now, if you cannot answer that one, you are in trouble. In fact, when you are writing a book, you always think about an audience. There's a lot of marketing that goes into it. For which audience am I writing this book to? Otherwise, you write it, it will remain in the shelves, bookshelves, stores, actually, bookstores, and no one will buy that book, right? So the answer to Ivan, I think, no, I think it wasn't Alvan. It was who? It was Mowabe, right? You know it. Think about it in terms of the fellows who are going to. Now, the other question comes from Ivan. How can I craft a scholarly research problem from the managerial issue, exclusion of men aged 35 plus from financial intervention since they cater for youth and women? Right. My friend Ivan, I don't know. You know, now you are more or less fulfilling the other old saying of the blind people who went to see an elephant, right? And one of them touched a tail and said, well, now I know elephant is like a snake-like feature, right? Another one somehow picked another portion, right? And said, now I know it's like a trunk of a tree, right? So I think you can see. But, you've given me something that is very useful. Please identify the practical problem. And to me, the practical issue that you need to identify here will be in terms of financial inclusion interventions, right? So you will discover that financial inclusion interventions prioritize women and youth, while older men receive less attention. Right now, once you do that, that will be a policy issue, but it is not yet a scholarly problem. Then the second step is to ask what we do not know, right? And the possible questions here, Ivan, what are the unintended consequences of targeted financial inclusion policies? And how does exclusion, for example, affect financial behavior among older women? And do current financial inclusion frameworks, for example, inadvertently create new forms of exclusion? And what mechanism explain different access to financial services across demographic groups, right? Now, of course, once you ask yourself those questions, you are moving towards scholarship. So the third step is to search for knowledge deficiencies. So go to literature and find out, right? Now, for example, if you discover that extensive studies on women's inclusion, right, actually exist, you have so many, you have a huge body of knowledge. You also have a huge body of knowledge on youth exclusion, but there is a very limited evidence on policy-induced exclusion among non-targeted populations. So that means that now a scholarly problem begins to emerge, right, Ivan? And to me, if I'm to think about one that is scholarly in this nature, you'll be able to state that although financial inclusion policies increasingly target women and youth as, for example, historically marginalized groups, little is known about whether such targeted interventions unintentionally exclude other vulnerable demographic groups, particularly men above the age of 35 years. And therefore, you go ahead to state that consequently, existing financial inclusion frameworks may inadequately explain the broader dynamics of inclusion and exclusion within developing economies. But of course, you generate this after asking yourself a number of questions and also interrogating literature, right? Of course, now, if you think about what I've just given you, the problem is no longer men are excluded. No. The problem now becomes we do not adequately understand the inclusion-exclusion dynamics created by targeted financial inclusion policies. Because, of course, you have that element of inclusion, but policies may also unintentionally exclude certain populations. And that becomes your problem, Ivan. Now, Sarah Chigongo, please explain further what you mean when you say the researcher has to tell us the paradigm that will dominate the study. You know, the problem I have now is that I have people who have joined to them. They have missed, I think, about 5 lectures, if I'm not mistaken. Ever since we started having lectures on the statement, sorry, on the problem, right, crafting a problem, this is the 5th lecture, if not the 6th lecture. So, but let me just say that what you are asking is one of the most important doctoral questions, right, that we have to face. A paradigm, right, Chigongo, represents your assumptions about reality, and that's what we call ontology. In other words, what exists, right? And that's the reality, and that's the practical problem. A practical problem exists. Now, that practical problem must be explained, and that's where we create knowledge as doctoral students. So we come up with another dimension of perspective, which is knowledge, right? That is now epistemology. How can we know it? How can we know that reality that we are talking about? Then later on, you bring in methodology, right? How should we investigate it? So let me just give again an example that I've been giving from a student who is working on employability, graduate employability. right? If you take a positivistic paradigm, a positivistic paradigm may actually ask what variables predict employability. That will be the focus. Now, a student who is going to take on an interpretivist paradigm, that person may ask, how do graduate experience, right? Not even graduate experience, but he will be able, he's interested in the experiences of the graduates in this case. So this interpretive person will ask a question, how do these graduates experience and make sense of employability? Now that would be an interpretivist perspective. So the person who is taking an interpretivist perspective will create a research problem based on the experiences, right, and making sense of employability. Now, a critical realist, a person who is using critical realist paradigm will ask a question, what hidden mechanisms generate employability outcomes? So that person will be concerned with the mechanisms, right, that are probably hidden and have to be unearthed. So if you look at Basker's critical realism perspective, again, I think we looked at Basker last time for those who did not attend the lecture, right? But if time allows in maybe future, we may have a lecture or two. And that is one of the paradigms that exist there, right? Now, a critical theorist, on the other hand, he may ask, how do social structures create employability inequalities? Because within the community, within the society, within the country, you've got social structures, right? And in this country, you actually see them, right? You have certain communities, they are more or less excluded from this area, right? And even they are not, you have graduates that are not really employable, right? In that case. So of course, you have the same topic, right, of employability, but they are the different, same topic, but different paradigms, different questions, different methods. So the paradigm here matters because it influences the research problem, it influences the research questions, it influences the methodology, it influences the interpretation of findings. So as a doctoral scholar, ladies and gentlemen, you should therefore be able to answer, why is this paradigm most appropriate for understanding my phenomenon? And that is very important. All right, I can see a question again from Joyce. Does it mean that gaps identified in the literature must fit well into research problem? Absolutely. My answer is absolutely, you've got it. In fact, this is one of the strongest indicator of doctoral quality. Right, so Joyce, you've got it rightly. That's what it should be, right? So is there another question here? Right. So I think allow me to close the session unless you strongly feel, oh, yeah, many other questions are coming in. Let me just see if there is one extra question here that I can respond to. I respond to that particular question, and then I close the session, ladies and gentlemen, right? Otherwise, time has gone, right? And then we'll have another lecture tomorrow afternoon for about 1.5 hours. Right. Amina, what is Amina saying? I missed out on the elements. Those ones now, I'll send you the what? The recording. But the elements are the, anyway, we shall see them. I'll just listen to this, then later on we shall, let me see if there's another person. Mugoya, can a topic have two knowledge domains? The answer is yes, but one should usually dominate, right? And for those who usually take the mixed methods perspective, right? They are coming from that, that angle, So you have a positivistic and interpretivist mixed together, or positivistic and constructivist, right? And again, we can see from the theories that you are employing whether they take us into that dimension. So can topic have two-dimensional knowledge domains? Excellent question. And the answer is yes, but one should usually dominate. Okay. All right. So now if we go into knowledge domains, if you have a topic like economic preparedness of SMEs, right, for opportunities in the oil and gas sector in Uganda, your study touches at least two domains. One is entrepreneurship, another one is SME development. And of course, the second domain here is oil and gas economics or energy economics. So the question now becomes, which scholarly conversation are you primarily contributing to? Are you contributing to energy economics? Are you contributing to oil and gas economics? Are you contributing to entrepreneurship? Are you contributing to SME development? So the moment that becomes very clear, then you know what your where you are. So if your topic is the SME capabilities and you are dealing with the readiness, competitiveness, entrepreneurial preparedness, then your primary domain will be entrepreneurship and SME development. Right, of course, with the oil and the gas serving as the contextual setting, that will become now the testing ground. So you need to understand that very well. Now, alternatively, if your work focuses on local content participation, right, or probably you deal with the sectoral development or resource economics, or even energy sector transformation, then your primary domain in this case may be energy economics or petroleum development. And of course, SMEs now will serve as the focal actors. So that means you are using these to test out these things that relate to energy economics and so forth. And that's why you should always know where you're contributing. Right, so of course, I know that many doctoral studies sit at the intersection of multiple domains. However, examiners will always ask that question. If your study makes a contribution, which body of knowledge benefit most? Right, and the answer here identifies your what we call dominant domain, ladies and gentlemen. Then I see our friend Joseph. One should be able to state my study. Okay, yeah. I think that's what he has mentioned. Then Mali, Joseph, I didn't know that you were present. Thank you for attending. Right. I think this gentleman, Mali, is asking the same question that I referred to. What specific metrics should a doctoral researcher use to objectively defend the worthiness of a gap? Right. A gap, my friend Mali, a gap becomes worthy when when it satisfies several criteria. One, and I mentioned those aspects. You can use them to develop your metrics. One is significance. Two is theoretical value. Three was explanatory power. Four was scholarly interest. Five is practical relevance. Six is originality, right? So if your study addresses all those particular aspects, then you've done a great job, right? Okay, all right. Is there another question? I don't see any other question. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to close this session. And so, ladies and gentlemen,
Prof.
Yes, please.
I would just want to clarify on the time for tomorrow so that members can prepare accordingly, or you will communicate.
I will communicate, but it will be in the afternoon, right, or probably evening, when many of us have gone to church and we've received the blessings from the pastors, from the preachers, from the various priests that usually preside over your ceremonies, spiritual ceremonies. Right, but thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for turning up. and let's meet tomorrow. I'll be sending a message indicating exactly when we'll be meeting. Right, enjoy your Saturday and bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Good day.
Thank you so much, Prof. God bless.
Prof, much appreciated.
Thank you.
Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.